It's Thursday, December 19th. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. A tentative deal, hundreds of billions of dollars at stake. I'm talking, of course, about the Churchill Falls MOU, a deal being sold as one that could change history. Well, today on the show, we're going to look under the hood of it and try to figure out what's what. I have two guests here with me in the studio today, NL Hydro President and CEO Jennifer Williams and Walter Parsons, Vice President, Transmission, Interconnections and Business Development. Your business card must be really long.
Yeah, I got to work on that title.
I didn't even include at Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro, so there's an extension, I'm assuming. Welcome both to the show. I know you're both busy. How are you both doing with all the talking?
We're good. We could talk about this for hours on end, so we're delighted to be here.
See, at CBC, that's what we like to hear. So, folks, as you're listening to this, we're going to dive into stuff. But and I've been talking about this show for a few days now. I've asked for input, and I've gotten some great input from people for questions. As you're listening, the text line is open. I will do my best to get to questions as we kind of roll on this. I've got my own, and I've got the ones that have been sent in. So, thank you, folks. 709-327-8206 is the text line. Emails, thesignal@cbc.ca. Why this deal? Why now? Simple question.
Sure. Why this deal? Why now? Now is simply because of Hydro-Quebec certainly has a significant need for electricity, and we have a significant opportunity that they can avail of. And it would involve, obviously, more money for the existing and obviously more power that can be developed in addition to more money for the existing. So it's that simple.
But why not before? Like, we're cracking open something that has not been cracked open. In the news, you saw Premier Andrew Furey rip up the 69 one. So why couldn't that? What's so special about this moment in time, about getting this together and this tentative deal?
It might feel like a moment, I think, to some, and certainly it is, and I don't want to underplay that. But this really has been multiple years in the making. We have been preparing inside the organization and as well as with government for multiple years. Certainly the Premier has been forging, I don't want to speak for him, but forging a new relationship with Quebec, which is appropriate. He had set up the expert panel several years ago. A couple of those panels were doing research and really understanding what can and should we do here in this evolving electricity moment as a society, this period of time. And then we, started after we, completed those reports and that research and then continued to consult with government. We're open-minded then with Quebec about their needs. So it is a moment, but it is years in the making.
Yeah. Moments take planning.
Moments take planning.
Then if it's a moment, moments take planning. Why is it so important for both sides? Like, what's the importance for both sides on this deal for what folks are getting?
I'll jump in on the Hydro-Quebec piece, but it's also applicable to our jurisdiction. Yeah. We pay a lot of attention to the electricity industry, obviously, and we talk about the growing need for electricity. And unless you've been paying attention to that in the country, that might be passing you a little bit by with regards to the news. But the amount of electricity in a decarbonized world that is going to be required is significant. For a jurisdiction like Quebec, which is already highly electrified, not electrified, but their electricity is already decarbonized. But for them to transition transportation sector, industrial processes, they would have to about double the size of their existing system. The same is for our system in Newfoundland and Labrador. We have a highly, except for Holyrood, which is entering a new phase, we have a highly hydroelectric driven system as well. But with electrification coming, we will have to also expand our system. So that is really the big premise of why we have to do this now together.
Yeah, in a time of electric cars, in a time of things like green steel and whatever else you want to, when you start to look at everything that is either now needs or will need electricity, and then the grids that we need for it, it goes up and up and up and
exactly.
up and up. Right. give us the broad strokes of the deal, and then we can kind of then I can start kind of dancing through some of the questions. But just give us just the broad strokes. So I know, folks, if you're listening, you're like, well, we kind of heard it. Well, we can hear it again because it's nice to try to understand this.
I'll jump in, and then Walter can probably add some additional color. This is really two big components, which is a replacement of the existing contract for Upper Churchill Power. That's one component, and the other is new developments, new power supply. That's the two biggest broad strokes. So a brand new contract for the existing asset, a 50-year approach, which would have ended in 2041, so it's about another 30 plus years for that contract. Then new developments, which is really 3 new generating expansions or 3 new generating assets and a significant transmission line associated with that. Obviously, the investment in all of those new assets will bring financial benefit, as will significant financial benefit associated with the new contract for the Upper Churchill. I don't know if, Walter, you want to add some additional.
Yeah, I think for us, obviously, in this province, it was always about the price, and the price being what it was always an issue, not just for the government, but for the people across the province. But it's more than just price in this MOU. Obviously, there is this big power recapture component. So we're now able to go from having 525 megawatts for use in Labrador to eventually that will quadruple through this agreement. And much of it will happen in the front end of the agreement. So it's that part of the Churchill Falls component is price. Part of it is access to power from Churchill itself for our industries in Labrador. And as Jennifer said, these new projects that we are proposing with Hydro-Quebec, for which they will take the risk on that construction, they also provide additional power that we can use for those green steel industries, for whatever else Labrador's future may bring.
Yeah, so spell it out a little bit more for me then. If we're talking the front end of the deal, quadrupling power for Labrador, what does, and you mentioned green steel as an example of something that's happening. What can folks in Labrador expect on what timeline for the extra power and what it means for the day-to-day for whether business or whatever other operations for electricity in Labrador?
We have been working with a number of interested parties in Labrador for several years now, and examining what they might like to do if they had access to extra power in Labrador. And we've had some, I'll call it folks kicking the tires with regards to possibility, and then we've had some very serious people at our table. And so we continue to talk with them, and now that we have this memorandum of understanding, we will head into, I guess, a new phase of really exploring what would come to fruition here. But what it could turn into is in about 10 years, we would essentially triple the access to power in Labrador. And, Walter mentioned the 525 megawatts, which powers all of Labrador, except for the remote communities. It would go to about 1,500 megawatts of power. So it's a huge increase. And we can entertain significant expansion of industry in Labrador with access to that power.
Is there anything for remote communities here? If where the crux of the population is in Labrador is getting this type of an increase, but what are the conversations for, if we look at the North Coast or the Southeast Coast for folks in Labrador? Mm-hmm.
So those conversations are not part of this, but what could happen there over time is if there's more access to power, for example, enabling transmission lines to some of the more remote communities is often thought about in conjunction with mining expansion and power for mines in Labrador. So is that something that can become more realistic now into the future with access to this power? And we remain open to those conversations with those kinds of customers as well, that would certainly entertain interconnection of communities.
One of the big questions, this is the question I think I've gotten the most, right? So even talking socially with friends and stuff about this and emails that have come in, why 50 years? And here's an expansion of that question, because that's the one that a guest the other day was like, as they were leaving, they're like, can you ask why 50 years? I'm like, yeah, can do. Thank you for the input. Here's the other one that was sent in. Why is it a 50-year deal when no one knows how high the price of renewables will go when the world is moving toward carbon neutral and away from non-renewables? Why is 50-year hydroelectric deal the standard when Quebec recently entered a 25-year agreement to sell hydroelectricity to New York?
Yeah, a great question. I mean, these types of big hydro projects, big plants like this, generally do have multi-decade contracts in place. And if you look at where we are with Hydro-Quebec, they already have a 17-year deal, for example. So if we were, for example, to insist on talking about a 25-year deal, I mean, that would not be of interest to Hydro-Quebec. They would certainly, they almost have that now. So, obviously more energy security for Quebec to understand the long term was important. But what we've done here in this MOU, and you can see in some of the schedules, is that the price is not fixed. So this concept that maybe it's going to be worth more in the future, maybe we don't know where green energy is going to go, we have captured that in the pricing model. So if we do see significant changes in the industry and prices go much higher than anyone expects, that will work its way back into the pricing scheme. So we've learned from the past. We know you can't set a price for 50 years. We know you can't even set a price, on the best forecast available for 50 years. It's just the world can change too much. So what we've done here is we've essentially created a basket of price indices, and we will be linked to that basket, both external market value, but we're also linked back to the cost of new generation in Quebec. So if new generation costs go higher, that will also reflect back into the price. So we believe the pricing model is future-proof, and it really will adapt with the way the industry adapts over time.
I'm just going to add, if that's okay,
Yeah, of course.
is one of the other phrases that I think is really important that folks familiarize themselves with in the memorandum, in that where it talks about those pricing indices that Walter just mentioned, is it talks about a principle of this is intended to capture fairness over the duration of the contract. That didn't exist prior. So the principles are very well laid out of what the intention is here, which is fairness over the term of this contract. It's really, really important that people understand that.
So when the finance minister the finance minister Siobhan Cody did an interview with CBC yesterday, mentioning there are off ramps and upgrades all throughout the contract. So this is some of what you're talking about. Like what's an off ramp to this?
There's two specific things, I think, when we're talking off ramps, which is the first thing that comes to mind. And, when we look at the old contract, there was no power that expired, say, the Hydro-Quebec had access to a significant amount, and that was for the full duration. But what we're doing with this next contract, or this MOU that we're moving into definitive agreements on, is in 2051 and in 2061, there's blocks of power that will expire from being allocated to Hydro-Quebec and will revert back to us. And how that would work is that works out to about 20% of what Gull Island's total is. And so we can renegotiate that price at that time. We could go out to another customer with it at the time. So there's an off-ramp in those years to go out and kind of get different value if we...
For a chunk.
For a chunk,
yeah.
If we didn't future-proof it in the way that we think we did today. That didn't exist in the old contract. So it is a way for us to, we think the existing with the new MOU, we believe we have, as Walter said, future-proofed it with the principles that we're putting in place and the indices that we're using. But we also have those additional off-ramps to capture value at that time that perhaps that is maybe not going to currently foresee.
Yeah, so these are all layers. But yeah, there's, just to be clear, there's no we're turning the car off the road from this, the deal will be the deal, but you're baking in protection is what
Correct.
You're saying, right?
Exactly.
Okay. You're both from here, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Briefly, what is your understanding of the cultural and financial importance of this moment, given the 69 agreement and folks, what that's meant, and then Muskrat Falls. So two albatrosses around our necks that has kind of kept this province down in a number of ways in the psyche of the province.
Yeah, it creates a lot of pressure on the team, no doubt. We've got a big team at Hydro. Well, maybe not a big team, 6 or 8 people that inside Hydro that were dedicated to this project that really felt that the weight of that history every day and working on this. It kind of pushed us to work harder and work smarter and to want to go out and consult with the best expertise that we could find, because we knew we had to get it right. So yeah, it's in some ways it's just part of what we do. I mean, we've been in electricity marketing since 2009 at Hydro. We've got an energy marketing division that sells power into the U.S., and we've got a number of experts over there that know the markets very well, and we've got outside advisors that know us well. So we, in a way, it's an energy transaction that we can use our own skill set on. But in other ways, like you said, it's almost embedded in the culture here in some ways, and we know that everyone has an opinion on it, and we knew that the expectations would be high. So I think that helped drive us to a place where we had high ambition, and we wouldn't be able to accept a deal that had any of the flat spots or any of the risks of the big deal of the past.
So, Walter, is this the best possible deal in your mind for this province?
Absolutely believe that it's the best possible deal for this province. Does that mean that it's no good for Quebec? Absolutely not. It's absolutely a good deal for Quebec as well. In our analysis, we think that we've done extremely well with this. The value that it's going to bring to the province is absolutely in line with the value of the asset. I mean, the asset itself was always extremely valuable. I mean, this one plant is generating 15% of Quebec's power. And the ability to expand it and the ability to build on the river with our partnership with the Innu Nation, of course, means that it can be so much more. So the value, the intrinsic value is huge. So we knew that we were going to see big numbers in the end. But yes, absolutely, I think we found a place where we've done the best that we possibly can in the negotiation, but still created enough value for Hydro-Quebec to make Hydro-Quebec want to partner and do this with us. And that's what any deal is. A deal has to create value for both sides, and we believe that we've done that here, but we're very proud of the Newfoundland and Labrador side of this.
Jennifer Williams, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough act to follow, that answer, but definitely the weight of it. When I was talking with one of my kids who's 21, and her depth of feeling about the history is only an inch deep. And that's amazing, right? Her scar tissue will be an inch deep. The scar tissue of so many other generations is so much deeper. But that is what this is possible for, is to change everything for how people feel about this incredible resource and what that actually practically will deliver. So not just the feeling, it's going to deliver massive value for decades to come. And this is, yes, absolutely a non-binding MOU. I don't think it should be underestimated, the work that went into this non-binding MOU. I just really want to touch on that really quick, because people can look at the length of this document, but it is on the basis, certainly on our side, and I would suggest on Hydro-Quebec's side too, several years of research and several years of talking with Hydro-Quebec and intense negotiating in the last period of time. So, this is really going to change everything for this province, certainly financially, but just that feeling of how we didn't do well, that's an underestimation of words. It is going to change everything in this province. And we would feel the weight of that, through the discussion. There was days that we had hard days where we're exhausted. We're like, are we going to be able to continue to fight for what we think is appropriate here? And one of the things that I kept saying to myself and sometimes to the team too, to try to find a bit of ray of light why we need to keep going. And I would say tens of thousands of people, maybe hundreds of thousands of people, would like to be sitting at the table that we were sitting at and looking at the research and looking at how we should do this. So if you think about it, if you were to ask people in this province, would you like to switch places with one of us and to sit down and to look at what we possibly should do here, you would have multiple people. So sometimes you had to dig pretty deep to keep going because it was pretty exhausting for a while. But what a privilege to be here. And hopefully people will take the time to examine what is going to deliver and what it looks like and how it is very different from those albatrosses, and see what we see, which we do believe this is a very good deal for our province as it is for Quebec.
Speaking of Quebec, I was listening to an interview on the Quebec framing of it. So I've got two clips that we'll play. I had assistance from my Radio-Canada colleague Patrick Butler with it. So folks, when you start to hear French here, it will be explained after the clip, but just for full understanding for folks, I wanted to play the 40-second or so clip, plus Patrick explains it. So let's roll that first one. Radio-Canada colleague Patrick Butler, welcome back to The Signal. Set up what we're about to hear, if you could.
Yeah, so we're going to hear a couple of clips of Michael Sabia, who is he's sort of Jennifer Williams' Quebec version, the CEO of Hydro-Quebec, essentially. And so he would have been the other, I guess, chief negotiator sitting across the table. He appeared on what's called the Téléjournal avec Patrice Roy. It's a supper-time show that has a huge audience in Quebec. Hosted by Patrice Roy, who is the guy who hosts all the big leaders' debates nationally, federally, when that happens on the French side. And they're talking about this deal, essentially.
Let's listen to the first clip.
Le Québec, vous dites, va, oui, payer plus cher qu'actuellement, bien sûr, sauf qu'on est assuré d'avoir beaucoup d'électricité pendant 50 ans encore.
À un prix remarquable. Et le prix remarquable est tellement important parce que ça, c'est la chose qui contribue à garder nos tarifs bas pour le résidentiel, pour le commercial, pour les industries, et donc indirectement, c'est quelque chose qui garde la position concurrentielle du Québec dans le monde.
OK. Donc, c'est pour ça, je reviens au contrat initial qui allait jusqu'en 2041, où il nous donnait l'électricité. Il n'aurait jamais accepté de nous vendre à 6 sous.
So, okay. So we have, first of all, the host of the show, Patrice Roy, who says, Quebec is going to pay more with this deal, but Quebec is going to have, or Hydro-Quebec is going to have Churchill Falls electricity, all the electricity it currently has, and then some, and over a period of the next, 50-odd years. And Michael Sabia responds and says, yeah, and what's important to note is that it's at a remarkable price. It's a word he used several times during this interview. And he says that's key because it allows Quebec to keep rates low for residential customers and for commercial customers. And it also allows Quebec to keep what he called its competitive advantage globally. Patrice Roy comes back and says, Newfoundland Labrador would never, let's be clear on this, Newfoundland Labrador would never have accepted this price if Quebec hadn't agreed to reopen the deal early, and 17 years early, as we know. And Michael Sabia says exactly that. That was sort of the give and take here.
Yeah, the 6 sous part, right, the 6 cents part per kilowatt hour, he said would not happen in 2041 if it was open then.
Exactly.
So any thoughts there from that first clip? Just especially the 6 cents per kilowatt hour wouldn't be the deal in 2041. It's only now that this is even being entertained. I'm just wondering your thoughts on some of that.
Yeah, I mean, both of us are at a fairly balanced position with regards to negotiating power, and I don't think one is significantly outsized. I do think that is a perspective that some folks would disagree with, but then you have to look at what Hydro-Quebec and Premier Legault would have to defend is they are giving up essentially 17 years of free power. That's a pretty big give. So that is sort of what they are giving up. Whether people think it's fair or not, that's irrelevant from the perspective of the balance of power in this moment. And we have this opportunity to offer, long-term more additional power and a re-upping of this power. So it's really important that is true, is that I know we wouldn't have entertained any conversation around any additional power unless we were saying, well, we're going to have to entertain the unfairness of this of what has been the moment and what is that going to be. And this is why you would see in this contract or in this memorandum an effective date of January 1st. So we're not waiting, for another few years to see if we are saying if this is going to be the case, this is effective essentially immediately. I mean, really, it's effective in a couple of weeks.
And we get retro pay once it's inked. Is that how that works?
Retro pay. Yeah. So, in the MOU, we have committed to work together to get this signed. All this, it's a lot of work in a year and another 4 months or 5 months, really, because it's 4 months, all of April. And then we would get that retro pay associated with that. So that's really, really important. The other important point to note is that, and this is with regards to the expansion of power, is that they are going to provide for our equity requirements for these significant developments. So essentially giving us some of that value already on top of the improved price for the Upper Churchill. The total value that's going to be is on a nominal basis. So over the next 10 years, when the equity is required, another $4.8 billion. Like, this is huge investment that Quebec is going to turn around and say, okay, we recognize the value of this asset. This is different, than before. We're going to recognize the value of this asset. We are going to pay your equity requirements, and we're going to manage the project. So, we think that this is a very balanced deal. They get access to more power. We get improved priced today.
The other part that struck me from that conversation, it's this discussion of keeping rates low in Quebec, right? Whether for regular folks, for industry, everyone else. How is there, what, and this is a question, a few people have sent in this question to me too. What should we be thinking about, or how, is there anything for the rates for Newfoundland and Labrador? You talked about increased power for Labrador, but in a time when a lot of people are looking at rates because of Muskrat Falls, is what should people take from this deal for potential of lowering rates, or is there the potential?
So this deal right now, as it relates to what government have essentially communicated, is that it affects the customers in Labrador. The Churchill Falls power does not affect the rates of the people on the island.
Yeah.
So the government has committed that the rates for the residential customers in Labrador will not change as a result of this deal. Walter actually uses this phrasing, and I've copied it. He says that, kind of the sad silver lining associated with this deal is that Newfoundland Labrador Hydro has been purchasing also at 0.2 cents, and then using that as the generation component of people's bills in Labrador. So what government has committed is those rates will not change as a result, because Newfoundland Labrador Hydro is also going to have to pay a higher price to CFLCO for this power go forward. So that is really what the implication would be for ratepayers. With regards to industrial, government has said that we'll have to revisit what that looks like for them. However, they expect to remain competitive and fair.
Okay. Let's roll that second clip. Patrick Butler, my Radio-Canada colleague, is still here. We've got a second clip to play. Again, just remind folks who we're listening to.
Yeah, so again, it's Patrice Roy, the host of the Téléjournal, or one of the Téléjournal programs on Radio-Canada on TV, and Michael Sabia, the CEO of Hydro-Québec.
And they're talking about the Churchill Falls MOU, the tentative deal. Let's give it a listen.
Mais imaginez qu'il n'y avait pas d'entente avec Terre-Neuve. Ça aurait voulu dire des ouvrages beaucoup plus coûteux au Québec.
Exactement. Et ça, c'est la clé. La clé à cette entente, parce que nos alternatives, c'est à peu près 16 sous par kilowattheure. Cette entente, c'est 6 sous. Donc, c'est un escompte de beaucoup plus que 50%. Et donc, c'est la raison pour laquelle cette entente est tellement avantageuse pour Hydro-Québec, mais également pour Terre-Neuve, parce que comme je viens de vous dire...
Attention à ce que vous dites, parce que les ondes se rendent jusqu'à Saint-Jean.
Ending with a bit of humor there. Be careful what you say, because folks in St. John's can hear it, but tell us what the whole thing says. Patrick?
Yeah, so Patrice Roy says, without a deal with Newfoundland and Labrador, it would have cost the province of Quebec a lot more to, I guess, gain access to this amount of renewable electricity generation. And Michael Sabia says exactly, and he said that's the key to this deal. He says the other renewable energy projects that are possible or under consideration in Quebec, they come with a price of about 16 cents per kilowatt hour. He says that's a whole lot more expensive than this around 6 cent per kilowatt price that we're talking about with this new deal concerning Churchill Falls. So he says, if you look at those two numbers, Hydro-Québec is getting a huge discount on what it could be paying. He says it's more than 50%. And like you say, Patrice Roy says, listen, we're broadcasting across the country. There are people in Newfoundland and Labrador who can hear you. Be careful. And Michael Sabia, and I don't know if we actually heard this in the clip, he comes back out of it and says, this is an excellent deal for Quebec, but in his opinion, it's also a good deal for Newfoundland and Labrador. That's at least that's the message that he passed, that he fait passer. Because my brain is working in two languages right now, but it's the message that he put forth to this audience in Quebec.
But yeah, so the conversation there, right? The 6 cents per kilowatt hour. But if this doesn't happen, if this deal falls apart, and Quebec does need this, they need this deal or this power, this amount, and they need more. they're saying it would be 6 cents per kilowatt hour. And that's why Michael Sabia, head of Hydro-Quebec, keeps talking about, it's a remarkable price. But he does say it's something that both sides are getting a lot from. You're going to be asked this question a lot, right? 16 cents per, if the replacement compared to 6. So at the risk for having you repeat yourself, can you just kind of give folks the rationale for what Newfoundland and Labrador is getting when you know that the price, the replacement price is 16 cents per kilowatt hour?
Sure. I'll open it up, and I expect Walter will join in as well. There has been a lot of numbers coming out of both sides and trying to reconcile, and different things getting quoted. One of the things that I think was even in the press release, the joint press release that came out on day one, is generally in Quebec they're quoting mitigated numbers, right? So it's really, really important because we may not be comparing apples to apples. So every time you're hearing those kinds of numbers, it is a mitigated number. And so what that means is that as a partial owner in both the Upper Churchill, so the existing plant, and as a partial owner of the new assets that will come, Hydro-Quebec is choosing to take their funds or the money they're going to earn off of that, apply it to rates and lower it. So when you hear a number, it is a mitigated number. It is not the actual price they're paying. Right. Really, really important that we continue to make sure that that's understood, because we're often not comparing apples to apples. So really, really important that we say that. I want to go back to what I had said earlier. And the value that we are required from Quebec to provide to us of what those new assets are going to be. So the replacement cost that Mr. Sabia was talking about, that is what the cents per kilowatt hour would be. But we have already extracted value back by getting our $4.8 billion in equity payments. So that is, we're already getting a portion of what that value is. So that's also really, really important to note. So while that might be what their comparison is, we've already extracted some of that value by requiring they pay for our equity in these projects. So I'll just stop there, and I'm sure Walter will want to jump in as well. Or you may not want to.
No. Obviously through this process, we spent a considerable amount of time understanding Hydro-Quebec's alternatives. We did a lot of work on that, and we know that, yes, there are projects that, will come online in the, 2030s and 2040s that will be expensive. There are also lots of projects, and particularly wind power, that is generally lower in price than hydro and nuclear. But obviously we looked as well at the next 17 years and $17 billion in value over the next 17 years, when it would be essentially zero under the old deal. So Hydro-Quebec was in an unusual situation where they were facing 17 beautiful years of free power under the previous deal, and then after that an uncertain future and high prices of replacement. So you really have to sort of push all those considerations together to understand what the value is. And as Jennifer said, they tend to quote a number that is reduced by using revenues from CFLCO, of which they are a minority shareholder. So remember, Hydro-Quebec owns 34% of CFLCO. So they take numbers from that. They take the dividends from that, and they apply it to the rates and quote a lower number to, because it is important for them to, not raise too many, concerns in Quebec about, rate shock and the like. And Hydro-Quebec is a big system. So even with this big supply going up 30 times in price, if the headline is prices going up 30 times, I could see Quebecers could be concerned. So, to put that money back into the system to help lower rates on their end, that's their dividends. They're entitled to do that. But yes, the price, all considering the strength of the hands that we had to play, we have captured a significant portion of that identified deal space.
All the building that has to happen, so Churchill Falls upgrades, the Churchill Falls 2, or the extra bit that was going to be built Gull Island, looking at Muskrat Falls, thinking about risk. There was, in that interview again with Michael Sabia, there was some discussion over 100% risk or 90% risk. Can someone just explain what risk there is for this province when it comes to all of the work that's going to be done?
Mm-hmm. I think it's probably best to break it down into the 4 projects, 4 large projects that are coming. And we'll put them in 2 buckets. One is what's under Newfoundland Labrador Hydro's control, and one that's under Hydro-Quebec's control. And the what will be under Hydro-Quebec's control as project manager, I will say, but with input from Newfoundland Labrador Hydro, and we will be the operator of all of the assets in the province. Hydro-Quebec will be project managing and financially accountable for any cost overruns associated with Gull Island as well as CF2. So the 2,250 megawatts plus the 1,100 megawatts, do the math for me. Right, so that's what they're going to be accountable for and to execute. Then on the Newfoundland and Labrador side, we will take on the transmission associated with that's in our province. They'll do the transmission in their province. And we will also do the upgrades, which is 550 megawatts in the existing plant. We'll roll that into part of our existing capital program. So we have our teams are already in the plant every year, taking equipment apart, putting it back together. We'll just add one of these units every single year. I would say every project has risk, but I would say certainly that one would be probably the lowest risk. We have to, get cracking on those because it is really an 11-year project because we're going to do one unit at a time, and those are 11 units there. And in the transmission line will have to be done and ready in order to have power flowing when those larger projects do get put online.
What are the costs for the lower risk side of it? What's the overall cost for these, like the estimates for costs for these projects?
I believe, and Walter can correct me, but I believe the upgrades is about $1.9 billion, and I believe the transmission is $3.5 or $3.6 billion. And then for Gull is close to 25, and for CF2 maybe $3.5 billion. Walter's double checking my memory.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, I mean, and I'm aware I'm asking a lot of questions here. But so for anyone who's still thinking about the history of this province, what's the messaging to get folks to say, to understand, for folks who have a fear of overruns and a repeat of history, how do you help folks out there with those fears?
I'll start real quick and then head it over to Walter, is that for the biggest investments that are happening, Hydro-Quebec is the project manager with input from us, and they will be accountable to execute and for any cost overruns arising. And our ownership, no matter what the costs are, will not change. Right? So the ownership of the Upper Churchill is not going to change. The ownership of Gull Island that we've agreed to is not going to change, no matter what the cost is. So I think that folks can be assured that is the case. And let's also be quite clear. Hydro-Quebec is good at this. And so with regards to risks, that is a risk mitigation, to be quite clear. They are good at this, and they build great plants. That's the other sort of question that I've seen some folks pose as well. What they're going to build this and then hand it over to us. I'm like, they want this plant to be highly reliable. I mean, there's nowhere in the world that we would think that they're going to build something that's not that good or not that.
No, the point is for them to have electricity. You need the thing to work.
100%. So I'm not concerned at all about the quality of product that we're going to get as a result of this. I'm quite comfortable with that. So I actually think we've significantly mitigated through our agreements with Hydro-Quebec on the risks that we have experienced in the last 10 or so years. Walter, do you want to add anything?
No, maybe just on that question of is it 100%, is it 90%? Hydro-Quebec will take 100% of the risk on these projects. However, we have the right to pull 10% of Gull Island's production back for use in Labrador. So if we decide to take power from Gull Island, then we would pay proportionally for the Gull Island cost. But that will be our option. So, Hydro-Quebec obviously is going to be using Gull Island as part. Gull Island is bigger than the entire Newfoundland and Labrador demand, so it's not something that we can use much of in province today or in the near future. So Hydro-Quebec will have most of the output, and Hydro-Quebec will take all that risk.
So I'm just looking at the questions that have been sent in. So there's a question about recall rights, which we've covered, right? If we need, so this one says, but if we need additional power in the future. So you've just mentioned that. Is there anything else around recall rights for if there's additional power needed to be covered? Because I think we've covered that for a bit.
Yeah, I think we basically said we're between now and 2061, we're going to quadruple the power. But now in, say, the mid-2030s or when all the projects are online, we're going to basically triple it. So that is significant recall power. I mean, as Walter said, from the 60s or early 70s, we're only using 525. Now, everything is different. I'm not at all comparing the last 5 decades to the next 5. But I think folks should be assured that we have negotiated a significant amount of power to have access to if we choose it. Now, the other thing as well is if we don't need it, Quebec will be quite happy to buy any power that we don't need. So it will not be a stranded set asset.
Here's a question that was sent in. And then I've got a couple questions about communication too. I was wondering what would realistically have to be raised as an issue through, and if you can't answer this, I get it, through the House of Assembly debate or feedback from the larger community that would result in government and you folks revisiting a component of the MOU. And is substantive change to the MOU even possible given Hydro's and government's ownership and promotion of it? So I think that the crux of this question is, and even for me listening to this conversation, if you're talking about the years that went into this, the MOU that is there now, but then it's there's a listening bit that has to happen, obviously, from the debate at the House of Assembly and from the general public. What kind of wiggle room is even possible for changes?
I would say that what is contained in this MOU is comprehensive and incredibly detailed. Again, the length of it does not indicate at all how much more is left to be negotiated. However, there is stuff left to be negotiated. And it's really important, and we will continue to gather that feedback. We also would have consulted, we would, as trusted parties through this last couple of years, here's some of the thinking we have, just to see, is there something we're missing? But we certainly would have, done a lot of research on that. So I don't think we're missing anything big, but that is not at all to say that we have missed the mark, with regards to the public. We are looking for that feedback. Then, if over the course of the next year and a bit, there is something that has come up, we would want to approach Quebec because we've done so much work together. Is it something that we can work on together? We hopefully would both be reasonable. But if it is a huge shift, I would say that we wouldn't appreciate a huge shift.
Yeah.
I think the work that we've done really is comprehensive and covers what we believe that we need with a lot of the protections into the future. But there's still some things left to do over the next year and a half. I would say there's some room to continue to evolve the content, but not significant at all.
So why is it important to listen to feedback?
Well, we had a lot of the right expertise involved in creating this deal and curating this deal again over multiple years. And we understand these markets and the relationships and how power gets used. And because of the history here is that we know that people are going to want to understand it. So this isn't just to say, here it is, eat your broccoli and like it.
Yeah.
It is to say, this is what this means. And I fundamentally believe as people understand it, as much as is possible, we do this all day, right? We can't have 500,000 people in the province suddenly become utility experts and understand every aspect and renegotiate the whole deal. But we do hope that with communication and talking with people about this, they will also understand it so that they won't be frustrated by this aspect or that aspect. And we need to, again, but if there is something that we've missed somehow, then obviously we'll want to take that into consideration.
This brings me, a big recommendation for the Muskrat Falls Inquiry was transparency, right? Keeping records of decisions being open to scrutiny. I know people are wondering this. So how are things, and for especially folks who lived through the last round, how are things going to be different this round? Perhaps things like today, I know you were on Open Line earlier, you were talking to my colleague Heather Gillis, like this might be part of it. How are things going to be different this time around for them?
I'll probably answer this sort of twofold, and happy to have Walter jump in too. So at its most fundamental, within Hydro itself right now, certainly for the last number of years, we have been out there saying we're open to questions, we're open to scrutiny, we are answering every media request. We show up to all that. We have media briefings. We're really putting ourselves out there. We are expanding upon our accountability to the Public Utilities Board. We're putting as much as is possible in front of the Public Utilities and being accountable there. We have a ton of respect for that process. So I would say as an organization, we are making sure that we are very accountable in the formats that make sense. So that would be a big part of it. Obviously, the Premier's bringing this to the House in January. That is going to be a significant area of examination, and I'm confident that the opposition parties will have a lot of information or a lot of questions that they will want to ask and enter into that debate. I think that will be a very important point that as many people in the province should absolutely tune in and pay attention to that moment as well.
Is there enough time for for MHAs? Like you said, folks are not experts on this stuff, right? And yet, and I know this is on the political side, but like to go in January 6th, I think it is for a debate. Is that enough time for the opposition and other folks to kind of soak this in, to have an actual informed discussion and debate around the ins and outs of what is so complicated to kind of grasp for the act of democracy in this province and the making of policy and legislation and moving the goalposts forward.
We could take the next 10 years and debate every intricacy associated with it. I'm not minimizing that question at all.
An extra 2 months is not 10 years, right?
No, I totally get it. And I don't think that the conversation ends on January 6th. I think the conversation continues over the coming year and a bit and certainly in through the whole relationship. I really don't think the conversation ends. I think what I'm trying to say is that Hydro is certainly behaving very differently. I think with all of the availability, we're trying to be very available to talk about this, to answer questions. It doesn't, and what I'm saying is January 6th is going to be really important, and the conversation needs to continue with people. So I don't think it's a one and done with regards to the conversation around this file. This is going to continue for a very long time.
What's the PUB? You mentioned PUB. What's the PUB's role for this? Are they like taking a good like what are they going to do with this when it comes to like taking a look at it and seeing, giving their opinion around it?
So that will certainly be up to government. I think that's something that they've been asked already. There's a couple of ways that the Public Utilities will have an actual official role that I think wouldn't be necessarily debated. The Public Utilities Board obviously weighs in on rates. So as rates affect customers in Labrador as a result of this, even if government has already committed that they will be mitigated, the Public Utilities Board absolutely will have questions and want to understand that aspect for sure. They will want to understand how we are planning the Labrador system for growth in Labrador. So they will want to understand those things. Any further than those sort of things that are already within their legislation or their act, that would to be determined. I don't know that they are currently enabled to examine a commercial deal. I don't think that that's currently in their area. Is that something that will be considered? I'm not sure.
Because I think to Muskrat Falls, a lot of the conversation was about having outside independent folks take a look at the thing to give feedback, so like we wouldn't get into a situation where there's massive overruns and we all know what happened. How important then do you think is it for, in this case, right? It's one thing for the opposition, where MHA is regular folks, right? Like to take a look at something, as opposed to saying, here's an independent group that specializes in this. They know it, and they're going to look at this and then give their opinion. Like, how important is it to have that as part of the process? Well,
I would suggest it has been part of the process already. Yeah. We had the expert panel, which would have had a range of
just a range of folks, right?
It would have had a range of folks involved in the creation of the advice to government on what should be done in this moment. You would have had utility folks involved with that. You would have had Indigenous participation. We had a lot of folks who had been very familiar. That was sort of one of the pieces. But as we referenced earlier, we have supplemented our Newfoundland Labrador Hydro team with experts in system planning and experts in the energy industry. So we would have purchased very deep knowledge on energy systems and processes based between Boston and Toronto. We had financial experts hired from New York. We would have supplemented our team with a lot of those additional third-party experts, and they would have helped us in our modeling of what is a fair deal here right now. So we absolutely have already had that in place to date.
But you do understand that given the history of everything, regardless, like just taking your word at that,
yep.
And it's not a personal thing, but folks are still going to want to know want input from somewhere else, right? Because it's like, okay, sure, but we heard that last time. Right.
I understand the point, and I'm just telling you what has been involved to date.
Okay.
And I think that, deciding or, putting the MOU, out to the public, loading it to the website as soon as we got it concluded was an important part of this process as
have
well.
A look. Yeah.
Every word of what we've agreed and every word of what will guide the definitive agreements is there. It is 25 or 30 pages, but that does have all of the financial structure there. And so the experts are already out there reviewing it, and that's an important process to hear what they have to say now that they have every word on paper.
Yeah.
April 30, 2026. What needs to be done?
Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, well, we obviously this MOU is non-binding, so as I said, it lays out the financial framework, the pricing, the volumes, the recapture, the way the new projects would be built. A lot of the hard negotiation was done in that process, but that now needs to be turned into legally binding documents. So we've got a lot of work to do. One of our senior negotiators who's been on this for decades, a few decades, I won't say a few, Joanna Harris on our team calls this the end of the beginning.
Yeah.
And that's really what it is. We've got a good framework to go forward, but we've got a lot of work to do with a strong legal team to turn this into agreements that will live for the 50 years, and we'll have to reflect what we've agreed. You're probably looking at going from a few dozen pages to 1,000 or more pages of contracts. There will be contracts to govern how Gull Island is constructed and what our input is. There will be contracts to govern the power purchases out of Churchill Falls. There is just
There's about a dozen, I think.
There's at least a dozen contracts that will need to be developed and finalized and signed in the next 16 months.
And are there more agreements needed with, for instance, Innu Nation, given what's coming? Because there's agreements in place, but thinking of Gull Island, will there be more agreements needed there?
Yeah, so as folks would know, we have an impact and benefits agreement with Innu Nation. They're our partner in Muskrat Falls and Gull Island. That agreement covered both the Lower Churchill projects. So that's in place, and that will govern the construction of Gull. And that was an important thing for Hydro-Quebec to see that, they're coming to partner with an organization that has a strong Indigenous partnership with the First Nation that has, rights defined in the area. So that's already done. There's obviously the Upper Churchill Redress Agreement, which covers Churchill Falls itself. So our partnership with Innu Nation is already squared away on that. But it's this new power plant at Churchill Falls, this Churchill Falls 2, the second powerhouse,
Right.
200 meters away, underground as well. That one is new to the IBA, the Impact and Benefits Agreement world. So we have already began discussions with Innu Nation on that. And we're having some great chats, but some more work needs to be done to finalize the CF2 project.
Lots of things can happen, right? There's three elections. I mean, two of which could have impact on this for the future in the next year for 2025. What happens if this thing falls apart?
The content, again, the comprehensive content and the many years of input into this document stands from a utility to utility perspective. I am hopeful that no matter what happens with those important influences, that the work would stand and it could carry on in ideally, no matter what happens, from a political leadership perspective. But if it does get impacted in some way, the work that has certainly been done on this side, and I would hope on the side in Quebec as well, it is a really good basis to pick up and just continue on in another iteration.
So who gives the final green light? Is it just the utilities or is it the provincial governments?
I guess obviously we work very closely together on what makes sense, and as we have to date, we would have definitely been informing along the way, what the opportunities look like and what the content is. But yeah, I mean, I think both levels, the utilities as well as the provincial governments, are committing themselves, with even public policy impacts for quite some time. So there is a role for both, certainly.
But is there a scenario where you say go, but the province says no, but you can go ahead anyways?
I don't think so.
Okay. Just wanted to be clear. And I'm glad I fit that in with 30 seconds left to the show. Well done, Adam. Most important question for last. 30 seconds left. Final message to people about what this could mean and the legacy of it. 30 seconds.
The legacy is that this will change the province. And it is important that folks are informed and understand it, so that when we say it's a good deal, that hopefully most people recognize that, and they will, help us identify where it could be improved. But we feel it's a really good deal as is, and it will change this province fundamentally.
Jennifer Williams, NL Hydro President and CEO, Walter Parsons, Vice President, Transmission, Interconnections and Business Development. Thank you both for this.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, folks, that is it for today's show. I weaved in as many questions as I could that were sent in that fit. There was a couple late questions that were that we covered earlier in the show. So we podcast this thing, and we will in the next couple of days have it up on YouTube as well. Feedback, the signal at cbc.ca. if you want to dart us an email. Tomorrow on the show, my colleague Amanda Gear will be by with The Call, a meeting place for Indigenous communities, voices and stories, a show about reconciliation. The holiday season is on the doorstep, so tomorrow's show is about feeling joy through the arts and celebration. Don't miss it, folks. Thank you for listening.